Afternoon. I'm really excited to be here with you guys in the book of James as we kind of move towards the conclusion of the book. I'm excited because this series has been I've really enjoyed this series. Because in the past, I'll be honest, I've never really liked James. You're allowed to not like, I don't know if you're allowed to not like Bible books, but maybe I've not got on well with James. To me, reading James felt a bit like being a comedy gig with like an insult comedian. You all remember gigs? They happened. It's one of these comedians where kind of their main thing is they go around the audience and they just go after people one by one and they roast them. Anyone been to one? No? Just me? Okay. Basically, you sit there and you kind of, you like enjoying it when he's making fun of other people's like job or hair or clothes. But there's also like a fear because you know that sooner or later he's going to get to you. Except when you're reading James, I'm the only one in the room and it's just me. He's just making fun of me. Do you know what I mean? I just felt a bit like I was being hit over the head with like my flaws, pride, worldliness, the way I use my language, my lack of wisdom, my inaction. It's like getting majorly roasted. And I've come away in the past a bit discouraged. But actually, over the last few weeks, the time we spent in this book, I've really enjoyed it. If you've missed the other kind of Sundays we've done, I'd really recommend catching up on them because one of the things I think it's done is help me to see that James isn't just piling on me to have a laugh or like make me feel bad. James is trying to warn us. So if you wanted to buy a packet of cigarettes these days, not endorsing it, just hypothetical, you'd have to look at a packet with a warning symbol on it, like a big massive letters saying, smoking this will make your lungs explode. And then there's like a gross picture of exploded lungs. You're like, oh, I didn't want to, oh, gross. That's not a prank. The government hasn't put that there to have a laugh at you. They've put it there to warn you, because there's something much worse than just seeing a gross image. And I think kind of that's what James is doing when he seems a bit negative or harsh. He's spotted a danger in the lives of the first century Christians he was writing to. And he's writing to help them avoid that danger. Not for a laugh, not as a prank, because he really cares about them. I think one of the dangers he's seen really sharply that we've seen come out over and over again is of this issue of integrity, real faith. You know, he sees this group of people claiming to be Christians, but their lives and the way they live them don't really stack up to that. James is really concerned about this. You know, he wants the followers of Jesus to have real faith that plays out in their lives. And he sees their hypocrisy coming out in all sorts of ways. And so he goes to lengths to make people aware of it. I think the passage we've just heard is more of that. James has seen inconsistencies with how his readers are spending their time, their money. So he's written this warning to them that we need to hear as well. And he warns them by rebuking arrogant planners and proclaiming a judgment on selfish moneymakers. First, his rebuke to arrogant planners. So if you've got your Bible with you, look at verse 13. It says, now listen, you who say, oh, today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. It's likely James has got kind of first century traveling merchants in mind, particularly, but the language he's using is familiar, isn't it? I just think we're part of a culture of planners. It's basically unavoidable. You spend most of your time, if you're a student, being asked what your plans are when you finish uni, which might set off an existential crisis, or maybe you followed the advice of people around you and have a plan. You know, I'll do an internship in this place, then I'll work at this company, move to the city, move out. Then, you know, maybe you leave university and all of a sudden you're being asked to make career plans and think about progression and buying a house. And before you know it, life is full of plans that sometimes span years into the future. Sensible plans, responsible plans. But not just kind of big scale life plans. Think how fast your Google Calendar filled up since pubs have reopened. You know, the holidays that you've booked, or spin classes, dinner parties, weddings, fishing trips, academic conferences. Modern life is busy, really busy. And it sometimes takes quite good planning to balance kind of home life, work life, social life commitments. Maybe that way of life is familiar to you. It is to me. And it feels innocuous, feels normal. It's just how life is in the 21st century. But James has seen something in this way of life that worried him enough to write a warning. This planning lifestyle can be dangerous to our Christian lives. Turns out it can lead us to kind of an arrogant or self-centered mindset, and not one that is rooted in the living, sovereign God. As we get so caught up in our self-sufficient plans, we think will make us happy, or give us wealth, or like job security, or we can invest our hopes into these plans and end up depending on ourselves and not on God. That's what James wants to warn us about. In the first part of his warning, James just tells us straight why it is that we think this kind of planning is sensible, but actually it's a lot less sensible than we think. He reminds us of two kind of unpleasant facts that we don't like to think about, like seeing that image on the cigarette packet. And the first is that we're not fortune tellers. Look at verse 13 again. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. At one level, sure, yeah, of course. Anything can happen. We know that. And, I doubt there are many people in this room who didn't have plans ruined in the last year, right? March 2020, I was still working at Emmanuel. I had a job lined up in the autumn. I had plane tickets to go to the US and hang out with some family in the summer. Big plans, responsible plans for the next year or so. And then I see Boris on TV, and before I know it, all gone. We have no idea what will happen tomorrow. But we often live as though we do, right? We don't like uncertainty, and so we just don't really think about it. We imagine our plans are pretty much concrete. If it's in the diary, it's going to happen. But they aren't. Your cricket match could get rained off. The bus to the airport can break down. Unexpected illness can strike. Our plans are much more up in the air than we think they are. They're not a secure place to find comfort. And the second of these wake-up truths is that life is short. Look at verse 14. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. It would be a weird question to ask, how would you sum up your life? I don't know how you'd answer that. But James says, imagine you're somewhere a bit cold, maybe Britain in late May. That joke made more sense when I wrote it a few days ago. It doesn't really work today. But you're somewhere cold, maybe Britain last week, and you're outdoors, and you take a big breath out. A bit of vapor comes out. The mist kind of lingers there for a second. It's kind of transparent, a bit ethereal. Then you blink, and it's gone. That, says James, is your life. Small, it's wispy, it wheezes into existence for a moment, and then it's gone and forgotten. We make plans like we're the center of the universe. Like the things we want to do are so important, but it won't be long till we're skeletons and our lives have been forgotten. Not so much a fun fact, but an important one. Right, James isn't saying this stuff to make fun of us or knock our self-esteem. Look at verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. See, the problem James is trying to shake us out of is that living this lifestyle of selfish planning can easily not consider God. He's just tried to help us see how silly that is. We don't know what will happen tomorrow, right? But God does. God's plans are absolute. He knows with a certainty what's going to happen. You can't take him off guard. You can't spoil his plans. He is the God of the universe and of time, and what he says goes. Only he can plan with 100% confidence. And where our lives are short and misty, those plans we make for ourselves have no real lasting effect, God is everlasting. His purposes are eternal. The work of his church will last. It's not missed. It's rock solid. Like last week, like all over James, he's concerned about Christians who claim to follow God but live as though he's not there. He bangs on this drum over and over again, I think because it's common and easy to do. I know I do it all the time. Pay lip service to committing to God, but with my time, with my plans, they're centered around me. And James is concerned because that's more than just bad planning, it is dangerous. So look at verse 16. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. Not considering God while we plan turns out ultimately as arrogance, putting ourselves in the driver's seat of lives that we've claimed, if we're Christians, belong to God. And that's basically the root of what the Bible calls sin, right? God is Lord of the universe, but we elevate ourselves into his place in all sorts of ways, specifically here with our time. We claim it as our own, and we work for it. We work it for our own selfish gain. So maybe we don't spend time in the Bible or with God because we'd really rather extra time in bed. Maybe we're not serving others the way we should, or not really committing to small group. We're not getting stuck into church because we're angling for a new job in a different city. Or maybe just church attendance is getting a bit ropey because life is manic. The diary is full up. We're really busy. Once things chill out a bit, get back on the tea and coffee rota, or really get stuck into small group. I don't know what it is for you. But whatever that looks like, for you it reflects, and for me it reflects sin in our planning, because what we end up doing is prioritizing ourselves and what matters most to us, and not what matters most to God, as we try and kind of half-heartedly squeeze Christian stuff around our own plans. James's answer to this at first glance seems a bit weird, right? Back in verse 15, instead you ought to say, oh, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Sounds a bit like a cheat code. You just like sprinkle the magic words in, and then all of a sudden your plans, yeah, they're fine. Yeah, it's sorted. But I think it's probably more than that. I think it's a correction to our like heart attitude that we need. So we become people who submit to God's will above our own, couching all of our plans in the knowledge that his are more important. And even, his plans are shaping our plans. His priorities are. Because if we get this, it won't just change how we plan, but what we plan. The way we use our time will be molded by our submission to God's plans. You can imagine someone who has a child, but after their child is born, they make no changes to their life whatsoever, or their schedule. They still get 8 hours of sleep a night, but they just put in the earplugs and they just leave. They still work a 60-hour work week, pub every evening, and spend every weekend kite surfing. That's madness, isn't it? Having a baby is a life-changing event that comes with responsibility to reshape your life. Of course, you can still go kite surfing. You can still go to the pub. That's fine. You have to kind of plan with them as the priority and not yourself. The metaphor collapses a little bit because God isn't a helpless baby, but that kind of vibe, I think, is what James is getting at in verse 17. As Christians, we have entered God's family. We've come to know the God of the universe. We've been given countless good things from him. We've got to know him. We've got to know what's important to him, things he says are right and wrong. We know the good we ought to be doing with our time. We have a responsibility to do that, to put him in the driver's seat. We should be prioritizing his will with our time, with our plans, even when we don't really feel like it. And in the second half of this passage, James kind of zooms in even further with a specific word to the rich. It's a topic he's touched on before in the letter. Even in the last chunk, you notice that it was all money-making plans he was talking about. But the language here is really intense. It's brutal. Kind of makes you feel uncomfortable just reading it. And it's quite likely when James is writing this, he has in mind a really specific group of people, particularly these rich landowners outside of the church who are using their wealth and influence to oppress those within it. He's mentioned them before in chapter 2, verse 6, where is it not the rich who are exploiting you? I think that goes some of the way to explaining the strength of his language, and the fact there's no redeeming options in here, right? There's no, instead you should do this, like in the previous bit. I think he wants his readers to hear this so they should know how to think properly about the rich people who are oppressing them, so they're not jealous. All these guys from the previous chunk who are making selfish plans, being rich isn't going to help you. It's not going to solve your problems. And it's right to remember that we're not exactly those rich landowners he's writing to. I think it'd be really easy to read these words and panic. Like, we're doomed if we misuse our wealth, if we have money. No, if you're in Jesus, there is forgiveness for this and every other sin. That being said, there are warnings about dangers of wealth that are really clear here, aren't there? That we need to pay attention to. Because as a church, we skew quite on the wealthy side, I'd say. Maybe when, not billionaires or anything, and like Dave from down the road might have more cars than you or something. But it's all relative. On a global historical scale, we're doing all right. And I know that isn't everyone. I know there'll be wildly different life circumstances in the room, don't get me wrong. But for a lot of us, that is like our lived reality. And the pull of riches is strong, isn't it? I don't think I believed it when like everyone warns you about how attractive money is, but when I was a student and I didn't have any. But then you graduate and your salary increases and your friends start investing and buying houses, and there's all these sensible financial decisions that everyone in the world around says are no-brainers, and it's easy to get sucked into. So I don't think James is saying any of those things are inherently bad, right? But they come with a massive health warning about what you do and what you don't do with wealth that God has given you. He starts off strong. Verse 1, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. A terrible judgment is on its way on these wealthy people. This kind of gives me Independence Day vibes. Not the day in America, but like the terrible movie, the alien invasion one. It's that scene where they first arrive, right? And everyone's going about their normal lives in New York City. There's like some guys playing basketball, people at business meetings, a normal life. And without warning, this kind of shadow passes over, ground starts to tremble, and these people are going about their normal lives. They drop everything, run out of their offices, basketball falls to the floor because a massive spaceship has settled over the city and it's about to blow up New York. That's the kind of feeling I get from this. These rich guys, they're chilling. They're doing their own thing. They're enjoying their money. But if they knew what was coming, they would weep and wail. A judgment is coming on them. And James gives two reasons for this judgment. That these rich people are hoarding wealth and that they're exploiting the innocent. Look at verse 2. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Hoarding is a weird word, I think, because it sounds like archaic, doesn't it? When I think of it, I think of like a dragon sat on top of a pile of jewels, or, this could be an obscure reference, but if you've seen DuckTales, Scrooge McDuck, I think we have a picture of Scrooge McDuck covered up. There he is. He does a morning swim in a pile of gold. I don't understand how it works. I'm sure that'd be really painful. But this is basically the image I have in my head when I think of hoarding. And so it just seems like a joke, but actually I think our society values the accumulation of wealth quite a lot. It's kind of a status symbol, right? We have league tables of the world's wealthiest people that we follow like sport. You get really excited when Elon Musk overtakes Jeff Bezos for the day. And it's not just with the super rich. We put a lot of stock into how much money and stuff we have as well, right? We use it to value ourselves and other people. We make judgments about people based on how much they have. And we're jealous of those who have more than us. James flags up a couple of issues with it. First is that wealth is fleeting. It rots. Your wealth has rotted. The moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Wealth won't last. It's this image of like massive wardrobes full of extravagant clothes that have turned into a buffet for moth clientele. If you've recently done GCSE science, you'll know that gold and silver don't really corrode or rust. They're non-reactive. So, what's James talking about? They're not going to corrode. But I don't think James needs to revise his Group 11 reactivity series. I think this is his point. Even gold and silver, these things that seem so secure, so long-lasting, they're not going to last either. Another reminder of the mistiness of life, isn't it? Here for a minute, gone the next. That's not the biggest problem with hoarding. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. The Bible is clear about the future of the world, that one day all people will stand before Jesus as he judges. When that's happening, showing him a really fat bank account, how well your investments did, a yacht collection, it's not going to do anything for you. In fact, it's the opposite. These guys and their hoarding, that their riches will testify against them at their trial. It's evidence of their selfishness and self-priority. Don't get me wrong. Don't think James is saying, like, never save money ever. Saving money to use it, saving so you won't be a burden in the future. Saving to buy a house so you can show hospitality to more people. That's one thing. These guys are just stashing up indulgent luxuries for themselves, for their comfort, for their status. And they'll be judged for it. They hoard and they exploit. Look at verse 4. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. Looks like these rich guys were getting all these workers in. People plowing the fields, some guys redoing the patios, whatever, and they wouldn't pay them. Verse 6, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. See, God is really bothered about poorer people, the workers and people living paycheck to paycheck. When he had his Israel as a nation in the Old Testament, he wrote loads of laws to make sure they were taken care of, and he kicked off when they weren't. If you ever get a chance to read the book of Amos, you'll see that in a big way. But these rich guys, by the way that they selfishly live, they're even condemning the poor to death through their exploitation. I think that's what verse 6 is getting at. But as they do that, it's like fattening themselves in the day of slaughter, like it's their last meal on death row. So for James's readers who are being directly oppressed by these guys, may be tempted to believe that just being wealthy would bring comfort and security. It's a good reminder that it won't. Wealth can be dangerous, and its misuse definitely is. But God has heard the cry of the exploited, will bring justice to those who've been oppressed. But for those with wealth, there is a warning here. Like I said, James can't be saying all wealth is bad. Wealth can be a great gift from God, be used really well. But he's saying it carries with it danger. So we need to be careful and pretty radical with how we think about and use wealth. Because just like our plans to be wholehearted, non-hypocritical Christians living out real faith means submitting our wealth to God and prioritizing the ways to use it that he says are good over the ways we want to use it. So that means being fully prepared to use it to serve others, particularly those without it. Sadly, James doesn't give us a rule of how much you can save before it becomes hoarding. There's no percentage mark to aim at so you can store up safely. I think it probably just involves a lot of heart checking. When you're making savings, why are you doing it? Are you doing it to provide for family down the line? Or so you won't be a burden in old age? Are you going to use it to get good rest or give some of it away? Or is it a comfort? Is it a brag to tell about how well you're doing? Is it because you love seeing the big numbers in your bank account and you find security in it? There's a really hard line to balance here. And this would be a great thing to talk about in small groups and get really into the nitty-gritty of it, because I don't have all the answers to this. But I just think these stark verses should make us pause and consider when we think about investing in that fund, buying that new pair of trainers, getting that extension on the house. Not to say you can't do any of those things, but to do them in a way that really lives out faith in our living God. That's probably quite hard. When it comes to injustice, most of us aren't in the position that we can just not pay farmers who work for us. If you are, really easy application here, just pay them. But that doesn't mean we're off the hook. And that exploitation and financial injustice aren't things we need to worry about. Our society, what it's done is just kind of push that away, a step away from us. But we know it still goes on, don't we? So we need to think hard about the companies we choose to buy from. Do they reflect our God's love and attention for the poor? Are we willing to make sacrifices to live with integrity? Let's be honest, small sacrifices, like paying a bit more for clothes or researching more before you buy a gadget. Are you up for having less comfort in a full bank account, less pride in possessions, to be a radically ethical consumer, even when it's inconvenient, to give away far more than the world would say is wise? If you're a Christian, you have a responsibility to use what you've been given for others and to sacrifice for the good of those around you. So hold on loosely to your money and your time. It makes sense when you think about it, right? If we're consistent with our faith and committed to God, we'll understand that our wealth is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It's a gift from God, and we want to use it in the ways he says are good. Because it's use it or lose it. I don't know about you, it feels like a lot, right? So I've got to submit to God's will with my plans. I've got to use my time to honor him and not selfishly. I've got to not store up money for myself, but instead be radically generous with it. Like, it feels a lot of stuff that, to be honest, I don't want to do. It feels like a lot to ask from God, right? Thankfully, God isn't some dude sat up in his ivory tower telling us to give up stuff when he hoards everything for himself. In fact, he doesn't ask us to do anything here that he hasn't done so much more. Before he asked us to do it, Jesus did it first. So he was a man who lived with integrity, with real faith, with a wholehearted commitment to God. He was wealthy beyond the wildest dreams of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, but rather than hoard it for himself and use it to exploit others, he emptied himself of it and became poor. He's so wholehearted in his devotion to God with his time and plans at outrageous personal cost. Not just changing up his business plans or like going to small group when he didn't feel like it, but on the night before his brutal execution with the cross just in front of him, while terrified and overwhelmed, prayed that famous prayer, "Not my will, but yours." It's only because he did that that selfish, arrogant, hypocritical people like me, like you, can be followers of God and enjoy him forever. Because after that suffering of his, he was raised to life, to glory with the Father forever. And that is the pattern of the Christian life. We've heard that before in James. Submitting now, sacrifice now, giving up things we might want for ourselves now, fully committing to God's ways with our time and money. And we'll be rewarded for it with things that actually last. We're not being asked to submit to a faraway taskmaster, but to a man who gave up everything so we could be his family. The things of God will last longer than our plans and our money will. They're a solid object in like a sea of mist. And we'll find that as we, with the help of Jesus, using what he gave up as motivation, as we loosen our grip on those things that everyone around us might hold dear, we'll find our grip on him getting tighter. Let me pray. Father, thank you for sending your son, Jesus. Thank you for the sacrifice that he made. Thank you for the way he used wealth and emptied himself of it. Thank you that he submitted to your will. I pray that with him in mind, with all that he's done in mind, we would be willing to have a heart like his, to sacrifice our time and our money for you. Amen.
Hey, it's time for our question time now, and Jordan's just jumping up to the lectern again. Jordan, I've just got one question for you through the Slido link, and it's this one where they start with a thanks, Jordan.
Oh, you're welcome.
And then they say, how does this speak into our attitude to the homeless and those less fortunate?
Yeah, okay. Let me just get there. Yeah, I mean, I think it says a lot, right? So in James 5, the stuff about wealth, at the very least, the requirement is do right by people. No injustice, no exploitation. But I think he demands much more than that, right? If we want to have lives that are consistent with our God and that we claim to follow, that we do follow, but just look at Jesus, how radically he gave away. We want to be like him. And look at the heart God has for the poor. I think the more we do that, the more we see what our attitudes and hearts towards the homeless and the less fortunate should be. I think it's probably quite radical. I'm really tempted to like let us off the hook a lot in these things. Like, I'll give a bit and you're fine, but I don't know, maybe it's give a lot. Yeah, I think that's good.
Thanks, Jordan. That's really helpful. And these are the challenging words, so thanks for not trying to pull your punches with them, but there's lots in here for us. So thank you very much. Why don't I pray?